Welcome to the Echoes of Ihsan podcast. We're embarking on a deep dive today into Islamic finance, specifically the concept of Zakat, as detailed in the Muwatta Imam Malik,
The Muwatta Imam Malik.
Book 17.
It's like a time capsule from the 8th century.
It is.
Offering us a glimpse into those early days of Islamic practice.
Exactly. And we're focusing on Zakat for this deep dive.
Of course.
One of the 5 pillars of Islam.
A foundational pillar.
And, it's not just about giving charity.
It's not simply a tax
Right.
or just an optional act of kindness.
It really is about purifying your wealth and contributing to a just society.
Absolutely. Zakat is a spiritual obligation that connects personal wealth
Right.
with communal well-being.
So for our listeners who are already pretty familiar with the basics of Zakat,
Yeah.
we're going beyond just what it is today.
Right.
We're uncovering the how and the why, according to this pivotal text.
We're going behind the scenes of early Islamic scholarship.
Okay.
We're going to be exploring those intricate details, the case studies,
Yeah.
even some of the debates that shaped how Zakat was understood and implemented.
All right, let's jump right in. One of the first things that struck me in the Muwatta
Yeah.
was how it establishes a very clear starting point for Zakat.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about giving on any amount of wealth.
Imam Malik outlines specific thresholds
Right.
for different types of wealth.
Right.
And he highlights that Zakat only becomes obligatory when your possessions reach a certain level.
It's like a safety net built into the system,
Exactly.
ensuring that Zakat is a contribution from those who've truly been blessed with abundance.
A hadith narrated by Abu Sa'id al-Khudri illustrates this beautifully.
Okay.
It states that there's no zakat on less than 5 camels, 5 awaq of silver.
Now, hold on. Let's unpack that for a second.
Sure.
For those who may not be familiar, an awaq is a unit of measurement used back then,
Right?
roughly equivalent to 200 dirhams of pure silver.
Yes.
And then we have 5 asik of dates,
Quite a lot of dates.
an asik being another unit of measurement, equivalent to 60 sai,
Right.
a sa being about 4 handfuls.
So we're talking about a substantial amount.
GR.
Yes. The point is, these thresholds, these nisab as they're called, aren't random numbers.
Right.
They represent a level of ownership where one is expected to contribute back to the community.
It's about acknowledging that the wealth we accumulate
Yes.
isn't solely due to our own efforts.
Mm-hmm.
It's a blessing from Allah, and with that blessing comes a responsibility.
Beautifully put.
Right.
And Imam Malik himself emphasizes this
Yes.
by stating that zakat is primarily paid on 3 main categories of wealth. Produce from cultivated land, gold and silver,
Okay.
and livestock.
So right from the start, we see this focus on defining
Exactly.
what falls under the umbrella of zakatable wealth.
Absolutely.
It's not just about money sitting in a bank account.
It's about recognizing those different forms of wealth that were prevalent at the time
Right.
and establishing a framework for how zakat applies to each of them.
This reminds me of something interesting I came across.
Oh,
Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz,
yes.
the Umayyad Caliph,
Yes.
he sent a letter to his governor in Damascus
Okay.
outlining these 3 categories of wealth for zakat.
It provides a fascinating insight into how these principles were being practiced.
It does. It shows a very clear understanding and application of these guidelines
Yes,
from the very top levels of leadership.
absolutely.
It highlights the importance of clear communication
Yes.
and standardization.
Standardization, yes.
Even in those early days,
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page
For sure.
when it came to zakat.
Now, let's shift our focus to one of these categories. Gold and silver.
Right.
This is where things get interesting.
Okay.
There are very specific rules regarding how long you need to own these assets
Yeah.
before zakat kicks in.
Right. It's not like you buy a gold coin one day
Right.
and suddenly owe zakat on it the next.
Exactly.
There's a time element involved.
The Muwatta sheds light on this by referencing the practices of 2 very important figures in early Islamic history,
Right.
Caliph Abu Bakr
Uh-huh.
and Caliph Uthman.
Both known for their piety
Indeed.
and meticulousness in upholding Islamic principles.
Both of them would inquire about the presence of zakatable wealth
Okay.
before distributing allowances.
So it wasn't just a matter of like, here's your allowance and, oh, by the way, we're taking out some zakats.
Exactly.
They wanted to ensure that zakat was being applied correctly,
Yes.
even in the context of these regular payments.
And this brings us to a crucial concept,
Okay.
the nisab, or the minimum amount you need to possess
Okay.
before zakat becomes obligatory.
Right.
For gold, the threshold is 20 dinars.
Okay.
And for silver, it's 200 dirhams.
So if you have less than that,
yes,
you're not obligated to pay zakat on your gold or silver holdings.
The Muwatta makes an interesting point here, though.
Okay.
The calculation of zakat for gold and silver is based on the weight of the metal, not just the number of coins.
Right, because a single large gold coin
exactly
could be worth more than several smaller ones.
Precisely.
Even if the number of coins is higher.
It's about the actual value of the metal.
Okay.
The Muwatta illustrates this with an example.
Okay.
Presented by Imam Malik himself.
Okay.
He talks about a man who had 160 dirhams by weight in a town where the exchange rate was 8 dirhams to a dinar.
So even though he had more than 200 dirhams in coins,
yes,
he wasn't obligated to pay zakat.
Exactly.
Because the weight of the silver didn't reach that equivalent of 200 dirhams of pure silver.
It's a fascinating detail, isn't it?
It is.
It shows the level of precision and thought that went into these calculations.
So if someone's gold or silver holdings increase over time, how does that factor into the zakat calculation?
The Muwatta provides guidance for those situations as well.
Okay.
Imam Malik offers a couple of scenarios to illustrate
how this works.
Okay.
In one example, a man acquires 5 dinars and he invests them.
Okay.
Once this investment grows to a zakatable amount, and a year has passed, he's obligated to pay zakat.
Even if that zakatable amount was reached just a day before the year mark.
Precisely.
So meeting both that nisab and the time requirement simultaneously.
And then the clock resets.
Right.
Once zakat is paid.
Okay.
Another year needs to pass before the next assessment.
It's like a continuous cycle.
It is.
Taking into account both the passage of time and the value of the holdings.
Another scenario involves a man with 10 dinars that grow to 20 dinars within a year.
Right.
In this case, since the original 10 dinars were already held for a year, zakat becomes due immediately upon reaching 20 dinars without waiting for another full year.
Right.
These examples show just the depth of consideration that went into applying zakat principles. To these real-world situations.
Where financial circumstances are constantly changing.
Exactly. It highlights the dynamic nature of zakat and the effort to ensure fairness and accuracy in its application.
It's not just the static set of rules.
It's not.
But a system that adapts to individual circumstances.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just limited to gold and silver.
Right.
The Muwatta also addresses income from other sources. Like renting property or hiring out slaves.
Interesting point.
How did they approach zakat on those earnings?
Imam Malik's ruling is that such income isn't subject to zakat until a full year has passed from the time the owner received it.
So even though it's income, it's treated differently.
It is.
From immediate profits.
From trading, for example. I think this distinction stems from the concept of wealth in hand and its potential for growth over time.
It's like saying that zakat is not simply about taxing income as it comes in.
But also about assessing wealth. That has had the opportunity to appreciate or generate further returns.
It's fascinating nuance.
Now imagine a scenario where gold or silver is jointly owned by multiple individuals.
That definitely adds a layer of complexity.
How do you figure out who owes what in those cases?
Imam Malik addresses this as well. He offers guidance on how to handle such situations. His preferred method is to assess each individual's share. If a co-owner's share reaches the nisab, then they are obligated to pay zakat.
So even if the total combined holdings are quite substantial, individuals with shares below the nisab are exempt.
It's about individual responsibility, not collective burden.
And if everyone's share meets the nisab, then zakat is calculated based on the proportion of each individual's ownership. It's all about fairness. And ensuring that those zakat obligations are tied to
individual wealth. And this principle of individual assessment, it extends even further. If someone has their gold or silver scattered among various people, they're instructed to consolidate the value and calculate zakat on the total sum.
So, no hiding assets to avoid your obligations.
Exactly.
So, we've covered quite a bit of ground on gold and silver.
Yes, we have.
But our deep dive doesn't stop there.
It doesn't.
Next time, we'll explore the rulings on mines.
Okay.
And buried treasure.
Buried treasure, Ari.
Uncovering even more intriguing details.
Sounds good.
From the Muwatta.
I'm looking forward to it.
Stay tuned.
See you then. Now let's shift gears a little bit and venture into the realm of mines and buried treasure.
Ooh, those sound like intriguing categories.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see how Zakat applies to wealth that's literally dug up from the earth.
Well, the Muwatta Imam Malik,
Yeah.
it dedicates a specific section to these types of assets. Right.
Shedding light on how they were viewed and treated in the context of Zakat.
So let's start with mines.
Okay.
What makes them unique in terms of Zakat?
Well,
is it simply treated like any other form of wealth?
Not quite.
Okay.
While the threshold for Zakat on mines is the same as for gold and silver, 20 dinars or 200 dirhams,
right,
there's a key difference in how and when Zakat is calculated.
Oh, really? What's the difference?
For mines, Zakat is payable on the extracted material as it's being dug up, rather than waiting for a full year to pass.
So it's like paying Zakat in installments.
Yes.
As the wealth is literally being unearthed.
Precisely.
That makes sense. You're essentially paying Zakat on the value of the minerals as they come out of the ground.
Yeah.
Rather than waiting for some,
Right.
arbitrary time period to elapse.
And this distinction from gold and silver, where you wait a year, is highlighted by comparing mines to crops.
Because with crops, you pay Zakat upon harvesting, right?
Exactly.
There's no waiting period there either.
Right.
It seems like the underlying principle is that when wealth is generated in a more immediate and tangible way, the Zakat obligation arises more promptly.
It's as if the act of physically extracting the wealth, whether it's minerals from the earth or produce from the land, triggers that obligation to pay Zakat.
Now let's move on to that other intriguing category. Buried treasure, or rikaz.
Rikaz, yes.
This is referred to in Islamic terminology. This seems like something straight out of an adventure novel.
It does, doesn't it?
Are we talking about like pirate booty and hidden chests full of gold?
Well, not exactly. Well, the concept of buried treasure might conjure up those images of pirates and adventure.
Right.
The Muwatta offers a more nuanced and specific definition.
All right. So what exactly constitutes rikaz, according to Imam Malik? According to Imam Malik, rikaz refers specifically to treasure buried during the pre-Islamic period, or Jahiliyyah. This treasure must be readily accessible and easily recoverable without the need for significant capital investment, laborious effort, or specialized tools.
So if you're casually strolling through the desert and you trip over a buried chest overflowing with gold coins, that would be considered rikaz.
That's a good example. However, if you're engaged in a complex archaeological dig, that requires years of excavation and specialized equipment to unearth a hidden tomb filled with ancient artifacts. That wouldn't fall under the definition of rikaz.
So it seems the key distinction is the effort and resources involved in acquiring that treasure.
Yes.
If it's readily accessible and discovered without significant investment or labor, then it's considered rikaz. And the Zakat ruling on rikaz is quite different.
It is.
From the usual 1/40th.
Yes.
We've discussed for gold and silver.
Oh, that's right.
What's the specific ruling for rikaz? For rikaz, a 1/5 tax is due.
Your 1/5 tax?
Yeah.
Wow, that's significantly higher.
It is.
Than the standard Zakat rate. It seems to reflect the unique nature of this type of wealth.
Yes.
Almost like a windfall or unexpected gain.
The higher tax rate could be seen as acknowledging the element of chance. And good fortune involved in discovering such readily accessible treasure.
It's like a recognition that this wealth wasn't acquired through the usual means of trade, labor, or inheritance.
Exactly.
So far, we've delved into the details of calculating Zakat for various types of wealth.
Yes.
But amidst all these calculations and categories, I can't help but wonder.
What's that?
Are there any exemptions when it comes to Zakat?
You raise a valid point. Surely not everything we own
of course not.
is subject to this obligation.
Islamic jurisprudence is known for its practicality and fairness.
Yeah.
And it certainly takes into account the personal needs and possessions of individuals.
That's reassuring to hear.
Yes.
I was starting to get a little worried about calculating zakat on every little trinket and personal item.
Not to worry. Yeah. The Muwatta outlines several exemptions.
Okay.
Particularly when it comes to items intended for personal use.
Okay.
Rather than trade or investment.
Okay, so what kind of items are exempt? Give us some examples.
To illustrate these exemptions,
okay,
the Muwatta shares an anecdote about Aisha, the Prophet's wife.
I'm always eager to hear stories from the Prophet's time. They offer such valuable insights into the practical application.
Yes, they do.
Of Islamic principles.
This particular anecdote reveals that Aisha didn't collect zakat on the jewelry worn by her orphaned nieces.
Oh. This suggests that jewelry worn for personal adornment is exempt.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
After all, jewelry worn for personal beautification is different from gold or silver held as an investment or a store of value.
Precisely.
And this practice is further corroborated by Abdullah ibn Umar, another renowned companion of the Prophet, who adorned his daughters and slave girls with gold jewelry.
Okay.
But refrained from paying zakat on those items.
So it seems there was a clear understanding, even in those early days, that personal items meant for adornment were distinct from wealth intended for trade or accumulation. Imam Malik outlines these exemptions explicitly. Jewelry worn for adornment, unminted gold and silver intended for future personal use, pearls, musk, and amber. All of these are exempt from zakat.
It highlights that zakat is not about burdening individuals with levies.
On every single possession.
It's not.
It's about a fair and reasonable contribution from wealth that has that potential for growth and societal impact.
Speaking of fair and reasonable contributions, this brings to mind a question that often comes up. What about the property of orphans?
That's a very important question.
It is.
Orphans are particularly vulnerable.
They are.
And it's crucial to ensure their financial well-being is protected.
How does the Muwatta address this issue? The Muwatta delves into this topic, presenting different perspectives and practices from early Islamic figures. We encounter a statement from Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second caliph, who encouraged trading with the property of orphans.
That's an interesting approach.
It is.
Why would he specifically recommend trading with their wealth?
His reasoning was that engaging in trade with the orphans' property would prevent their wealth from being depleted by zakat. If the wealth was actively generating returns, it could potentially outpace those zakat deductions, thus preserving and even growing their inheritance.
It shows a deep concern for the financial security of orphans.
Absolutely.
He was essentially advocating for a proactive approach to managing their wealth, ensuring it wouldn't be diminished by the zakat obligation.
Exactly. However, the Muwatta also presents a seemingly contrasting viewpoint. There's an anecdote about Aisha herself, who diligently collected zakat on the property of orphans under her care.
So that seems to contradict.
It does a bit,
Umar's approach of trying to, minimize the impact of zakat to orphans' wealth.
How do we reconcile these seemingly different practices? It's important to remember that the Muwatta isn't presenting these as conflicting rulings, but rather as different approaches within a permissible framework. While Umar encouraged trading to potentially offset zakat, Aisha's practice highlights that the obligation to pay zakat on the wealth itself remains, regardless of how it's managed.
So that responsibility to fulfill the zakat obligation doesn't disappear.
No.
But there's room for flexibility in how the wealth is managed to benefit the orphan.
Precisely. The well-being of the orphan is paramount. And while zakat is an obligatory act of worship, it should be managed in a way that doesn't jeopardize their financial security. The Muwatta emphasizes that trading on behalf of orphans is permissible, but it requires appropriate permissions and safeguards to protect their interests.
We see this principle in action through the example of Yahya ibn Said,
Right.
who purchased property for his orphan nephews.
Yes.
Demonstrating that the management of their wealth was undertaken with their best interests in mind.
Exactly. It shows that zakat, even when applied to the wealth of orphans, wasn't meant to be a burden.
Right.
But rather a means of purifying.
Right.
And even potentially growing their assets.
Right.
While contributing to the overall well-being of the community.
It's fascinating how the Muwatta navigates these complex issues.
It is, yeah.
With real-life examples and nuanced interpretations.
It provides guidance without being overly rigid.
Right.
Recognizing those diverse circumstances that people face.
Absolutely.
It speaks to the wisdom and flexibility inherent in Islamic jurisprudence, which seeks to provide solutions that are both just and compassionate.
And as we continue exploring the Muwatta, we'll encounter even more intricate scenarios.
We will.
And the insightful rulings
that address them. I'm eager to see what other gems of wisdom we uncover.
Let's continue our deep dive.
Okay.
And see what other aspects of zakat await us.
So
we've been having this fascinating discussion about zakat, unearthing all these insightful details from the Muwatta Imam Malik.
It's been quite the journey through these early Islamic practices.
Now, I'm really curious to explore how zakat intersects with two other areas. Inheritance and debts.
Okay.
These seem like areas where the timing and application of zakat could get, a bit complicated.
They certainly require careful consideration.
They do.
Let's start with inheritance.
Right.
The Muwatta provides clear guidance on what happens if someone passes away and hasn't paid zakat on their wealth.
So I imagine that would raise questions about whether that responsibility then transfers to the heirs.
What does Imam Malik say about this? Imam Malik's opinion is that if a deceased person had outstanding zakat dues, it should be deducted from the 1/3 of the estate, allocated for bequests.
So it's treated as a priority debt.
It is.
That needs to be settled.
Yes.
Before the remaining inheritance is distributed.
It reinforces the idea that fulfilling those zakat obligations is a serious matter.
Right.
And these obligations don't just disappear upon death.
Now, what about the zakat on the inherited wealth itself? Does it become due immediately upon receiving the inheritance?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Muwatta clarifies that zakat on inherited wealth is only due after a year has passed. From the date the heir acquired the assets.
So there's like a grace period?
You could say that.
Allowing the heirs time to kind of manage that inherited wealth before the zakat obligation kicks in.
It acknowledges that inheriting wealth often comes with responsibilities and adjustments.
Right.
It allows the heirs time to settle into their new financial situation.
Now, shifting gears to the topic of debts. I recall a piece of wisdom from Uthman ibn Affan, the third caliph. That seems relevant here.
He reminded people to settle their debts before paying zakat.
So it's like making sure your own financial house is in order. Before extending a helping hand to others.
It's a sense of responsibility and prioritization.
And this leads us to Imam Malik's stance on zakat for lenders. He states that lenders only pay zakat on debts once they have been repaid.
Even if several years have passed.
So it's not simply about the passage of time.
It's not.
But about the actual recovery of the loaned wealth. Until that debt is repaid. That money isn't truly part of the lender's available assets. And once the debt is repaid, it's integrated with the lender's existing wealth. For those zakat calculations.
It simplifies the process and ensures that zakat is assessed on the current state of one's overall wealth.
Now let's move on to another form of wealth that was prevalent during that time. Merchandise. Intended for trade. How do they approach zakat on these goods?
The Muwatta offers valuable insights into this. We have a detailed account of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz providing specific instructions to his governor in Egypt. Regarding zakat on merchandise.
These historical examples are so fascinating.
They are.
They really bring these concepts to life.
Yes, they do.
And show how these principles were being put into practice.
Absolutely.
In his letter, Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz even specifies different zakat rates for Muslims and people of the book.
It demonstrates a nuanced application of the Zakat principles in a diverse and multicultural society.
It highlights the adaptability and inclusivity of zakat as a system.
Even in those early days of its implementation.
Now, Imam Malik's ruling on merchandise is that zakat is only paid after a year has elapsed from the initial zakat payment on the wealth used to purchase those goods. So it's not about when you acquire the merchandise, but rather about when the original capital was subject to zakat.
And this distinguishes it from crops, where zakat is due upon harvesting.
Regardless of when the seeds were purchased.
Exactly.
That's an interesting distinction.
It is.
So if I were to use my zakat-paid wealth to buy a flock of sheep and sell them within a year, I wouldn't owe zakat on those sales.
But if you were to harvest a crop of wheat, you would pay zakat on that harvest. Regardless of when you bought the seeds.
It highlights those different cycles of wealth generation.
Exactly.
For crops, each harvest represents a new cycle. While for merchandise, the zakat cycle is tied to that initial capital. Now, the Muwatta also introduces this concept of kanz. Which seems to carry a strong warning attached to it.
It does.
What is kanz?
Kanz, as defined by Abdullah ibn Umar, refers to wealth
on which zakat has not been paid. Essentially, it's hidden wealth that's been intentionally kept out of the zakat system.
And the warning comes in the form of a rather vivid hadith.
It does. A hadith narrated by Abu Huraira paints a powerful image of hidden wealth transforming into a venomous serpent on the day of judgment, clinging to its owner and tormenting them.
So it goes beyond just the financial aspect of zakat.
Yes, it
and speaks to that spiritual purification and accountability.
Absolutely.
Hiding wealth and avoiding zakat isn't just a financial misstep. It's a spiritual transgression.
It shows that zakat is deeply intertwined with one's relationship with Allah.
Fulfilling this obligation is about obedience, trust, and recognizing that true wealth comes from seeking Allah's blessings.
Beautifully put.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground on various forms of wealth. Gold, silver, mines, treasure, even merchandise.
But a discussion about zakat wouldn't be complete.
It wouldn't.
Without addressing livestock.
Livestock was a significant form of wealth.
It was.
In those times.
So let's dive into the world of livestock and zakat. Let's start with camels. Which seem to have a very specific set of guidelines.
The Muwatta includes an excerpt from Umar ibn al-Khattab's book on zakat, outlining the precise type and age of camel due based on the size of the herd.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is.
They really went into the specifics.
They did.
And showing that those zakat calculations were accurate and fair.
And it wasn't just about the numbers. The Muwatta also addresses ethical considerations, prohibiting the selection of a ram, an old or injured ewe, or manipulating the flock to avoid paying the proper zakat.
So it's not just about meeting that numerical obligation.
It's not.
But also about ensuring that the animals selected for zakat are of reasonable quality. It's about fairness and recognizing the value of the livestock owner's property.
And the Muwatta also emphasizes the need for clear ownership distinctions when livestock is jointly owned to prevent disputes and ensure each owner fulfills their zakat obligation.
Now, what about sheep and goats? Do they have their own set of zakat calculations?
They do. The Muwatta outlines the zakat calculation for sheep and goats, specifying the number of ewes due based on the size of the flock. And of course, those same ethical considerations apply.
Selecting animals of average quality, avoiding hardship for the owner, ensuring fairness in the assessment.
Now, I'm curious about cattle. Are they treated any differently from sheep and goats when it comes to zakat? The Muwatta shares an anecdote about Muad ibn Jabal, a companion of the Prophet, who was tasked with collecting zakat on cattle. In this story, Muwatta ibn Jabal encounters a situation where he didn't have clear guidance from the Prophet regarding the specific zakat due on a particular number of cows.
So even those closest to the Prophet sometimes faced situations that required, further clarification or interpretation.
It highlights the dynamic nature of Islamic jurisprudence.
It does.
And how it evolved to address real-world challenges.
It shows that the application of zakat wasn't always a simple matter.
It wasn't.
Of following a rigid set of rules.
Right.
There was room for interpretation.
Yes.
Judgment.
Yeah.
And seeking further guidance.
When needed.
When needed.
The Muwatta also addresses the rules for combining different types of livestock for zakat calculations.
So no cleverly escaping zakat.
Exactly.
By diversifying your animal portfolio.
That principle of assessing wealth as a whole applies here as well.
And the Muwatta even outlines which type of animal should be given as zakat. If the owner has more of one kind than another.
It gets very specific.
It does. Now, what about the offspring of these animals?
Okay.
Are newborn lambs and kids included in those zakat calculations?
That's a common question.
It is.
The Muwatta sheds light on this by referencing instructions given by Umar ibn al-Khattab to his zakat collector, Sufyan ibn Abdullah. Umar, always the meticulous administrator, clarified that newborn lambs and kids are indeed included in the zakat assessment. But certain types of young animals are exempt.
So it's not about taking every single newborn.
No.
But about recognizing which animals are truly part of that productive flock that contributes to the overall wealth.
Exactly.
It shows a sensitivity to the needs of both the livestock owner and the recipients of zakat.
A balanced approach.
Imagine a scenario where a zakat collector comes around. After a 2-year gap, would that mean double the zakat for the livestock owner?
The Muwatta addresses this with an example of a man whose camel herd drastically dwindled from 100 to just 5 during that 2-year period. The ruling is that zakat is only due based on the livestock present at the time of assessment.
So even though he technically owed zakat on a much larger herd in the past, he's only assessed
on what he currently possesses.
It's
a compassionate approach.
It is.
Recognizing that circumstances can change. It wouldn't be fair to burden someone with a zakat debt based on past wealth that no longer exists.
It speaks to that principle of fairness.
It does.
And practicality that we've seen throughout the Muwatta.
Zakat is about assessing present wealth. Not punishing people for past prosperity.
Now, throughout our deep dive,
yes,
we've seen these glimpses of ethical consideration woven into these zakat regulations. Are there any specific examples?
Oh, absolutely.
That emphasize the importance of compassion and fairness in collecting zakat?
The Muwatta shares an anecdote about Umar ibn al-Khattab's disapproval of taking a milk-producing sheep as zakat. He recognized that this would directly impact the livelihood of the owner, depriving them of a source of sustenance.
That's a powerful example of considering the impact of zakat.
It is.
On the individual fulfilling the obligation. It's not just about collecting what's due. It's about doing so in a way that minimizes hardship and recognizes the humanity of those involved.
And this concern for fairness is echoed in another example where Muhammad ibn Maslama allowed livestock owners to select which animals they would give as zakat.
Showing respect for the owner's knowledge of their own livestock.
Yes.
Allowing them some agency in fulfilling their obligation.
A collaborative approach. Recognizing the expertise and perspective
of the individual.
And
this emphasis on making zakat payment easy and avoiding burdening Muslims is a recurring theme in the Muwatta.
It highlights that the fulfillment of this pillar of Islam should be approached with compassion, understanding, and a genuine desire to uphold its spirit, not just its letter.
Now, after all this talk about calculating and collecting zakat, I think it's time to turn our attention to the beneficiaries of this wealth, who are the rightful recipients of zakat. And how is it distributed?
The Muwatta provides clear guidance on this,
Okay.
outlining 5 categories of people eligible to receive zakat.
Okay.
Those include fighters in the way of Allah,
Okay.
those defending the Muslim community, zakat collectors, those responsible for administering the system, those who have suffered financial loss or hardship, those who purchase it with their money. This category has been subject to different interpretations over time. And the poor neighbors of a recipient who shares their zakat, highlighting that importance of extending kindness and support within one's immediate community.
So it really encompasses a range of needs.
Yes, it does.
From supporting those protecting the community to aiding those struggling to make ends meet.
Yes.
It's a system designed to address those various forms of vulnerability and hardship within society.
And Imam Malik's view is that the distribution of zakat is ultimately at the discretion of the person in charge, focusing on prioritizing the most needy and numerous groups.
So it's a dynamic system
it is.
that can adapt to changing circumstances
Yes.
and prioritize those most in need.
Now, we've discussed who pays zakat, how it's calculated,
and who receives it.
Right.
But what happens if someone outright refuses to fulfill their zakat obligation?
That brings up the question of consequences and enforcement.
It does.
How did they approach those who resisted paying zakat?
The Muwatta doesn't shy away from this issue.
Okay.
We see Abu Bakr taking a very strong stance on zakat collection.
Okay.
He famously declared his willingness to fight.
Oh, wow.
For even a small court.
Okay.
If it was withheld unjustly.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
It shows how seriously they took the obligation of zakat. It wasn't simply a suggestion.
It wasn't.
Or a voluntary act of charity.
Right.
It was a fundamental duty.
A duty.
That they were willing to uphold.
Upholding the zakat system was essential for the well-being of the entire community.
And we see this commitment reflected in the actions of Umar ibn al-Khattab, who unknowingly consumed milk from zakat livestock.
And was so disturbed by this, that he induced vomiting to rectify the situation.
His reaction underscores the importance of respecting the sanctity of zakat funds. It wasn't just about avoiding personal benefit from those funds. It was about ensuring that they were used for their intended purpose.
Supporting the needy.
Exactly.
And fulfilling that divine mandate.
We also see a more strategic approach in the story of Umar ibn Abd al-Aziz, who cleverly encouraged a man to pay zakat by initially refusing to collect it from him. Reverse psychology in action.
So the man, upon realizing that his refusal was being honored, felt a sense of shame. And ultimately fulfilled his obligation.
It's fascinating, appealing to someone's conscience. And sense of communal responsibility.
And ultimately the Islamic ruling allows for fighting those who persistently refuse to fulfill their zakat obligation.
If peaceful means fail.
If peaceful means fail.
This highlights that while zakat is a spiritual duty, its fulfillment is also essential for maintaining social justice and economic balance.
It's a last resort.
It is.
But it underscores that importance of upholding this pillar of Islam.
Zakat is not optional or negotiable.
Zakat is not.
It's a foundational principle upon which a just society is built.
Now let's turn our attention to agricultural produce. Another significant source of wealth during that time.
The Muwatta provides specific guidelines for calculating zakat on various crops.
I imagine there could be quite a bit of variation.
There is.
Depending on the type of crop. Irrigation methods, other factors.
The Muwatta addresses this by specifying different zakat rates for land irrigated by natural means, like rain or springs, versus land that requires irrigation for naturally irrigated land. The zakat rate is 1/10 of the yield, while for irrigated land, it's 1/20.
So the effort involved in cultivation is taken into consideration.
It is.
If you're putting in that extra work to irrigate your land,
you're
rewarded with a lower zakat rate.
It incentivizes agricultural development and recognizes that labor involved.
In producing those essential crops. Now, to simplify the process, the Muwatta outlines the practice of estimating the zakat due on certain fruits, like dates and grapes.
Okay.
While they're still in the tree.
While they're still in the tree. Okay.
This makes it easier for people to fulfill their obligations without waiting for the harvest to be fully collected and processed.
It's a practical approach.
It is.
Recognizing those challenges of accurately measuring and dividing produce after it's been harvested and distributed.
Now, this estimation practice doesn't apply to all crops.
It doesn't.
For grains and seeds.
Yes.
Zakat is calculated.
After harvesting and processing.
After harvesting and processing.
Because grains and seeds often require further processing to be considered readily usable and marketable.
Zakat is due on that final product.
It is.
Not the raw harvest.
Exactly.
And the Muwatta provides clear rules.
It does.
For calculating zakat.
Okay.
If the estimated food is damaged before harvest.
It ensures fairness.
It does.
Recognizing that factors beyond the farmer's control can affect the final yield.
Speaking of different crops, what about olives?
Olives.
Do they have their own set of zakat guidelines?
They do.
Okay.
The Muwatta specifies that zakat on olives is calculated after they've been pressed into oil.
Okay.
And similar to dates and grapes, there's a minimum quantity, 5 ausak, before zakat becomes due.
But unlike those fruits, olives aren't estimated.
They're not.
While on the tree.
The zakat assessment happens after the olives have been processed into oil.
So their usable form.
In your usable form, exactly.
It's about assessing that final product that holds value.
Yes.
Can be traded or consumed.
Now, the Muwatta also provides a list of grains and seeds that are subject to zakat.
Okay.
This includes those staple crops of the region, wheat, barley, various types of millet, rice, lentils, beans, sesame seeds, and other similar grains.
It's a comprehensive list.
It is.
That covers those essential foodstuffs that form the basis of sustenance and trade.
In that society.
Now, imagine someone has a variety of produce.
Okay.
But none of them individually reach that nisab for zakat.
Right.
Are they combined for assessment?
The Muwatta addresses this, stating that different types of produce are not combined for calculating zakat, unless they individually reach the nisab.
So if you have 4 asik of dates, grapes, wheat, and pulses, no zakat is due until one category reaches 5 asik.
It ensures that zakat is levied on a substantial amount of a particular type of produce, not on a mishmash of small holdings.
But what about different varieties within a category? Like different types of dates. Or wheat.
Those are combined for zakat calculation. The distinction is between broad categories of produce versus variations within a category.
So it's about recognizing the fundamental difference between dates and wheat, for example.
While acknowledging that different types of dates essentially serve the same purpose.
And this brings to mind an example from Umar ibn al-Khattab's time. He differentiated between pulses and cereals when collecting zakat from Nabatean Christians. Considering all pulses as one category for zakat assessment, while treating cereals differently.
So it shows that level of detail and thought that went into applying these principles fairly and consistently.
Even in dealings with non-Muslims.
Yes.
So we've covered a lot of ground on zakatable produce.
We have.
But I'm also curious about whether any fruits or vegetables are exempt from zakat.
Not everything that grows is subject to zakat.
The Muwatta clearly states that no zakat is due on soft fruits. Like pomegranates, peaches, figs.
And similar items.
Those are considered, luxury items.
Yes.
Or fruits enjoyed for their immediate consumption. Rather than staples or traded commodities.
And the exemption also extends to animal fodder, herbs, and vegetables.
So it seems the focus is on staple crops that form that basis of sustenance and trade.
Rather than every single edible plant.
And even for those exempt items, if they're sold, zakat only becomes due on that sale price after a year has passed.
Again, it's about assessing accumulated wealth. Not every single transaction.
Now, our exploration of zakat wouldn't be complete.
It wouldn't.
Without touching on a few more specific categories that often raise questions. Slaves, horses, and honey.
These were all assets that people possessed.
During that time.
In that time.
And it's interesting to see how they were viewed. In the context of zakat.
In the context of zakat.
So let's start with slaves.
Right.
Did people have to pay zakat on the slaves that they owned?
The Muwatta cites a hadith stating that Muslims are not obligated to pay zakat on their slaves or horses.
So those are outright exemptions.
Outright exemption.
And we see this exemption being upheld in practice?
We do.
Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah
Yes.
refused to